Hi, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. I am your host today, Paige Niederinghaus, and I am joined by Daniel Thompson, who is here to talk about what's new with Tauri. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
So Tauri 1.0 launched back in 2022, and it made a very big splash, as you've mentioned, some of the different variety of companies that are using it. But what pushed the team to invest in kind of this major architectural rethink for 2.0? What were some of the pain points or some of the sticking points that you saw that required this much rework of it?
Part of it had to do with the fact that as an open source project, you're going to be confronted sooner or later with the mechanical realities of people needing money to offset the time they invest in projects. Tauri grew to a size, I don't know how many lines of code we are today. It's probably a couple million if you combine all the plugins and all the other parts and machinery that are involved. And this got us to the point where we had a large community, a lot of people were depending on us, and we were starting to get a lot of requests to fix things and to keep them safe because people like safe code. What ended up happening is we created a company. We raised some money from amazing venture capital angels, the titans of industry. You might know a couple names like Bob Young, Guillermo Rauch, and others, just to cherry pick a few, as well as the support of OSS Capital. And with these funds, we were able to really dedicate, I would say a year and a half of time to solving some of these early architectural problems. I'll give you an example. When you start out with a project, you have an idea about how you'd like to build it. And we found ourselves in this challenging spot where we built ourselves into a corner because we wanted people to be able to extend the framework, but we already decided that some things were really important to have in the framework, like notifications. You might think that notifications are really important to have, but not everybody needs them. And when we decided we were going to go into mobile to make Tauri first-class citizen for iOS and Android, that gave us the opportunity to rethink the entire architecture. And without going too deep into the nuances of Rust, it also required a redesign of how we built the underlying systems harness. And so all of this led us to the realization that we can reduce the size of the core of Tauri, which makes it surprisingly even smaller for version 2. And in doing so, we end up with a more secure platform in and of itself. And then depending on who you are and what you want to do with the application, you can add plugins to that system. And it's a well-known architecture. And what it does for us also is it gives us an explicit tree shaking from JavaScript, where, during your import phase, you just import the parts that you need of the module, so you don't import the rest of that cruft. Well, for the web, that's important because it reduces the size of the ultimate bundles that you're downloading, which makes your time to first paint faster. With Tauri, there's no network latency. We're basically instant, right? So that's one advantage you're going to have over a website is that it's all right there. But the utility of keeping these parts out might be lost if you're using a general purpose system like Node.js. Electron uses Node.js. Nothing wrong with it, except there are a lot of applications out there that don't ever need the internet. So why are you going to use isomorphic fetch or fetch in the first place if you don't need it? And by removing functionality or not even including functionality in the first place, you're reducing the bundle size. Smaller size means it's easier to load into memory. And also you're reducing attack vectors, because if it's possible for an attacker to exfiltrate, then they're going to. And I feel that by reducing that surface area at every opportunity, we are really coming closer to that secure by design mentality and philosophy.
Do you feel like the community partners and the governance board, like the Tauri Working Group and the partners like Crab Nebula and some others, have really helped to influence and shape the project's direction as well?
Wow, politics. Listen, we made it a choice during COVID that the access to the core team, if you like, the movers and shakers of the project, is open to anyone. If you contribute a single line of code or file an issue or have a topic that's of interest to you and you join us in the GitHub or the Discord communities, then we are ready to welcome you into the working group. And from that perspective, we have a very flat hierarchy. And after, I would say, 2 years of having the working group, we disbanded the core team. After, I would say, 3 years of having the paper tigers of the board of directors that you need in order to have a legal entity, we don't make decisions there anymore. We really believe that the doers decide, and the people who are in the working group, some of them come from industry. I know that Crab Nebula, where I'm also the CEO and founder, we have financed several thousand hours of developer engagement in the Tauri community, not in a way that necessarily funnels people back to the corporate project, but more as a means of supporting people getting to use Tauri in the first place, and also continuing the development of it. And I think the light touch regime is really the right way to go, because I'm not going to say that there are no leaders. I think people step up when they have time and ability and get engaged when they feel called to do so. And that, I believe, it is a really solid indicator for why 6.5 years after we started this project, we are over 100,000 stars on GitHub, and people keep on coming to us with ideas and bug fixes. And I would say the community is extremely healthy. Obviously, money changes things, and maybe we have somewhere around $90,000 of donations that we've accumulated over 6 years. Like, it's hard to decide how you're going to spend that money. If you've got a good idea and you're listening to the podcast, reach out. We don't want to play favorites, but maybe when we release the next big version of Tauri, we'll run a conference and invite everybody to come and use the money for supporting the community. Because I think at the end of the day, the community is taking care of itself, and it's put money forward to do things like protect the trademark, right? So we filed a trademark in the UK and in the EU, and we have marginal expenses, but because we are an MIT Apache 2 open source project that is based around a community, we don't really have that many expenses in and of themselves. So I would say the community is doing a great job keeping itself together. And similarly, there's always room for more people to get involved. And I think that's another signifier of a healthy community.
Absolutely. So let's talk about one of those newer things, the Create Tauri app. That looks like a big investment in an onboarding tool. So was that a community-driven initiative? And what were some of the big pain points that you were trying to solve for new developers to Tauri?
Okay, Bun, Node, Yarn, NPM, PNPM, Dino, like, where do you start? Windows, Windows, Mac, Linux? Actually, we had somebody trying to develop on Android. And like, when you're new to a methodology, it's hard to know where to start, right? When Amr Bashir said, hey guys, we need to have a better DX to help people get this stuff started. It was a community project, and he still maintains it. And the idea is, I'm not saying this to be divisive, more to be inclusive. We are agnostic. Honestly, if you want to use Python and hook into Tauri and build your Python app and use, that's great. Hey, you want to build with Go, or you want to build a PHP backend that's great. React with Go, or I don't know, like maybe you're an HTMX person. Everything's okay. And because this matrix of, oh my gosh, there's so much to do here. Oh, are you using TypeScript or just JavaScript? Like, if it takes you 3 hours to set up your system, you're going to kind of walk away and just feel lost. And this is all stuff we started before the advent of agentic coding, because we knew that people want to just hit the ground running. So the Create Tauri app was created at a point in time when we pretty much validated that any framework that is properly instantiated is going to run great. But that proper instantiation of how do you set up Vite and React, or like what are the configurations if you want to use, for example, a Rust-based user interface? Like there's so many different modalities. And what this showed us also was that at the end of the day, developers are human and developers appreciate the support. And I'm going to be honest, I think it's been 4 years since I did like a manual setup of Tauri. I always use Create Tauri App.
I've had similar experiences, not with Tauri, but with React. When it first came out, it was so painful to just get everything wired up and make things work together. And Create React App just eliminated all of that. And it was so great because you ran one command, you installed your npm node modules, and then you were up and running. It was like magic. Okay, so in your opinion, how close are we to a truly unified experience across desktop and mobile? What things are still missing that make that feel smooth and seamless?
So to talk about the technological backdrop for Tauri, you have an application bundle that has a little bit of code in it. And generally speaking, up until now, every platform has used a different web view. So the way it works is, just stay on the desktop for a moment. You create a window in a context of an application that gives you access to storage that application has just for itself. And inside of that window, you inject a web view context. And then in that context, you populate it with your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, WASM, all that stuff. And web views have always sort of been a thing that the browser manufacturers have undertaken because they might have been useful for things like, PWAs. Or in the context of Windows recently, or maybe not so since for a couple of years now, they've been building WebView 2 from Edge. And they use the WebView 2 in, if I'm not mistaken, Modern Teams. So Modern Teams app uses the WebView 2, and it's maintained by a magnificent group of people. However, I can tell you WebView 2 is not the same as WK WebKit on Mac or iOS. And it's definitely not the same as the WebView GTK on Linux. And so once you get to Android, then you've got the system view, and like they're all slightly different. And this has led to performance issues. For example, on Linux, historically, we've had performance issues because WebKit GTK just hasn't been maintained with the army of maintainers that WebView 2 has at its disposal. It's just been Igalia and a couple developers there. And so in our search for harmonizing this, we came back to a solution that Electron has had for a while, or something like Electron. That is, Electron uses a patched version of Chromium that they ship. Every binary gets its own Chromium. And what we've started experimenting with, actually really great results, is the Chromium Embedded Framework. Like I said earlier, we love all of our developers, and we don't judge people for developing the way they want to develop. And if someone comes to me and says, Daniel, the only thing that's important to me is that our app looks exactly the same on Mac, Windows, and Linux, has the same exact feature set, nothing else matters. If that's what matters to them, then I should really be listening to that. And I can tell you, the experience with Ceph is breathtaking. It's not quite ready for prime time. We've got a couple issues getting Linux built, and I don't know, it takes like 10 hours on Mac OS runners, and there's a lot of heavy lifting in the background to get it to work. But when you have it running, you've got 60 frames per second everywhere, and you also have the ability to add browser extensions. So imagine you're building an app, and you're using that Chromium, and you enable it to connect with 1Password. For example, I love 1Password as a product. Full disclosure, they're amazing and I use them all the time. But when you can allow your customer to interact with the tools that they're using in the app, suddenly it feels like you've completed the circle. And again, there are people who tell me, Daniel, there's no way I'm ever going to use Ceph. Are you kidding? It's Google. Why would I do that? I love my small binaries. And so there are people who choose to make apps differently. And like I said, and I'll repeat again, we are, I guess, the agnostic framework. We want everybody to be happy. And it might be one of the few communities where React devs and Vue devs and Angular devs and Solid devs hang out and solve problems together. A fun side effect.
It's the great unifier.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be humble. I'm just happy that people can get their work done.
In addition to Ceph, you also mentioned that you brought Servo into the Tauri ecosystem as well. So can you talk a little bit about what problem or what Servo is doing or adding?
Yeah, back in 2019, when we started, we had this vision that we were going to be able to ship a Servo WebView to everybody. And then, not to go into intercorporate politics, you can read all about it on Wikipedia and stuff. There's reasons why Mozilla lost funding in 2020. One of the fallouts from that was that they had to let the entire development team go that were involved in Servo. And basically, Servo was a Rust-based experiment, mostly Rust-based experiment, to redefine how browsers can be built in a memory-safe context. Amazing stuff. Back in 2020, I just think back to all of the parts of Rust that we have today that we didn't have then. It was amazing. Unfortunately, the team disbanded and the project stalled. Running a browser is not something you do with 3 people. It just isn't. And I would say, what was this, 3 years ago, we received a grant from the Dutch foundation NLNet. They provided us with funding from the European Commission's Horizon-funded group called Next Generation Internet, NGI 0, to be particular. And that it wasn't a lot of money. I think it was like 50,000 euros. And we used that money to develop a prototype where we took what we were able to piece together from the Servo project and built a web view that you could interact with from a Tauri app or from Tauri Tech, to be honest. And it worked. It was clunky. There was missing a lot of CSS, but around the same time with FutureWay and Igalia, a group of people got together and started hacking on it, and old friends from Servo days got back involved. And now it has a technical steering committee, and Servo is actually a member of the Linux Foundation, or was. I think it still is. And as time goes on, things get improved. And nevertheless, it's not a well-funded project like Ladybird or Firefox or Chrome, for that matter. So it's always going to be a few years behind. Where we are with that today is a spin-off project called Verso that is still in the phase where we know it can work, but we find it useful for certain projects where you can make assumptions about the way it's going to be used. Now, I said earlier that everything in Tauri is agnostic. You can use it for anything and everything, and that's the goal and the philosophy. With Verso, this branch of Servo that's really focused on making a web view, what we've found is that projects where you can, for example, make assumptions about the CSS that's going to be used, or the JavaScript that's going to be used, or the security context in which it's going to be used, that you have this toolkit that can really allow you to build, that's going to sound terrible, but to build your own web view for very particular use cases. And I think that you might recognize that I'm not totally free to speak because we are working for a few companies under NDA to develop this for them. And I find it to be really exciting because it lets us do things like shared memory, right? If you can share memory between the Rust and the JavaScript, you can do a lot. However, that's a security risk that you would never give to somebody who's unprepared for it. And in fact, you need to mitigate that risk at an operating system level. So there's like fun things you can do with it. And I see it as an opportunity for the community to grow if, and I'm saying if at some point Servo takes a massive leap forward, like perhaps is possible with agentic AI, that it suddenly catches up with the mainstream browsers. We will instantly adopt it and make sure that it's available to everybody as a web view, again, as an alternative. So it's, again, one of those issues of 200 million euros or dollars or 200 million of anything. There's a lot of money and energy and time that would go into it. And I think having somebody pick up the burden would be good. And we would definitely support it if we could.
Do you ever see Tauri allowing per platform WebView overrides? So Servo on Linux, System WebView on Mac OS, something like that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Rust makes that so easy because you have conditional compilation pathways that allow you to define what happens on specific platforms. And I think the platform that would definitely need it is Linux, just simply because WebKit GTK, I think, is on its way out. But you're right, absolutely. That works fine, and there's no reason why you shouldn't do it. Again, I think that what a lot of new app developers forget is that even if your app looks exactly the same on Mac, Windows, and Linux, the users are different, right? Like a Linux user is not the same type of persona as a Mac user, and that's actually defined by the way the operating system expects you to work with it. And so, yeah, you can, but my advice to people listening to this podcast is really make sure you have experts designing for Linux. Don't try to shoehorn Mac OS methodology onto a Linux user because you're going to get comments.
That's a nice way of putting it, because I work for a company where everybody is allowed to choose their own work laptop. So I'm on Mac. I have coworkers who are on Windows. I have others who are on Linux. And even in a Zoom call, we have different controls. I can do different things with my Mac Zoom versus what my coworker can do with their Linux Zoom. So it's always interesting. And but parity across the platforms is really important.
No, I think, user interface is important for the user. It's getting more important as we define our own user interfaces. Like now you get to choose light and dark mode, but in a few years, you're going to be able to choose everything about the user interface. Like designers are going to take a backseat because user preference is going to take over. And I think more important than making a perfect user interface is actually the data structure that has to be the same. I mean, there's a reason why we call them migrations to databases, because everyone has to migrate. And I guess, I don't know, I hope that the systematic nature that we've developed for software development keeps on maintaining its human-centric perspective, even as we begin to use more and more AI tools. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch gears a little bit to talk about mobile development. That has been a very requested feature for Tauri since the beginning. So what did you learn during the 2-year exploration about mobile architecture and how to make that work with Tauri as well?
Well, if you know Swift and Java, you're fine. No, but to be very blunt, when I think about the way in which open source has helped us continue the mission of mobile development, is that we used a lot of the homework from the capacitor community and from Ionic and Cordova and I just forgot what before Cordova was PhoneGap, right? Like this evolution of people wanting to use JavaScript to interact with their phones has a historical imperative. And when Ionic made the move to decide to shut down their services, we really felt, okay, this is an opportunity for us to continue in that realm. And nevertheless, what I find so interesting is that the platforms, Google and Apple's platforms, they still make it so hard. Okay, with Apple, you can programmatically create a new app if you have a developer ID and know exactly what you're doing and you figure out the app. Like you can. If you're smart about it and you get your stuff figured out, after days and weeks of trying, you get it working. But with the Google Play Store, you can't. You have to go to the Play Store, manually create it, and then you get this token. Like, it feels like it's designed to make our lives hard. And that part of things, honestly, I feel like it's part of a long gone era, but we're still stuck in it. And I struggle to find a good metaphor for how frustrating I find it. But what we learned is that those platforms aren't going away. Like, you're designing for not just a device, not just an ecosystem, but the App Store. And so I guess the tip I have for people out there who want to build for mobile, one tip is to actually include a desktop target, because a lot of the work you're going to be doing is going to be connecting to remote services and fixing their user interface. And this is all stuff you can totally make from a desktop. Even if you never plan to ship a desktop app, you can use the desktop version of Tauri because it has great debugging features that you can use. You use that desktop version for your daily driver, and then you switch over to maybe a reduced size of the desktop. You get something close to the shape of the end target device, and then you move over to the device. What else did we learn? We learned that Open Harmony, if you've heard of Harmony OS from China, that's from Huawei, they have a more commercially available version called Open Harmony. And what we've learned there is that it's possible to grow into an ecosystem once it's stabilized. Oniro is the name in Europe for Open Harmony. There's a collaboration between Huawei and the Eclipse Foundation, and that also, I forgot the name of the Chinese open source group, but all three of them together have made a European flavor of Open Harmony called Oniro, and it feels like back in the days of early Android, like Android KitKat, right? Like, this interface is going to be changing, and like, you can get it to work on a demo device, but it just feels like for new mobile operating systems, because there's a bunch of them out there, it's really hard to target them unless the manufacturer of that operating system or the device, or both, as the case may be, unless they're prepared to work on the developer experience. I'm not saying everybody has to have a Create Tauri app lookalike on their operating system, but I just wish they would stop shipping these monolithic applications to, like, why do I need another IDE, Apple? I'm sorry. Why do I need that? Technically, I don't. But buying into the ecosystem means you're probably not going to be building an Apple app on a Windows device. I think if you can get an emulator running, you could. Anyway, I guess the lesson learned from the mobile ecosystem is that mobile's going to be mobile, and it's not going to be easy. And like I said before, your designer is going to be good on all the platforms, but you still have to ship for users. And I think that's even more so the issue on mobile than on desktop. We always want to say everybody's like one platform and you can build for everything. And while it's true on the surface, experience has shown that you need some person dedicated for every platform you're building on, at the very least, so you can do QA.
And I'm sure it gets even more complicated when you have smart TVs that are brought into the mix and all kinds of other screens, exactly, wearables, yeah. All the other things that we don't even think about, but also have to support or should be able to support in some way.
Yeah, I think this again comes back to the decisions that a product team makes. And I don't know. I always tell people to design their apps based on the platform it's running. Like, we have these user stories, and I think user stories are great. And then you have the jobs to be done methodology, and that's also fine. But if your application needs GPS, you're not building it on your desktop. You could, But I have a camera, and if that camera is linked to my phone over Bluetooth, then it will embed GPS coordinates in the image. How stupid is that? If you need GPS in your image, put a GPS sensor in the camera instead of making me as a user go through these hurdles, because at the end of the day, the user is going to decide to only take one device with them. And as a photographer, I see that people are not walking around with giant cameras anymore. Okay, there's the whole retro scene. There's a retro scene of film, which I love and I care for as much as I love the people who take vinyl to the parties. And it's great to have that historicism, but everybody is taking pictures with their Pixel or their iPhone because they have it all right there. Like, I think it was Ansel Adams who said the best camera you have is the one that you have with you. And I carry that design methodology over to software because the best app that you have is the one that does what you need it to do.
Right. Full stop. Okay, let's talk about the plugin system. So 2.0 got a more advanced plugin system, and it moves a lot of the functionality that was core to Tauri into the plugins. So in your opinion, what does this solve long term?
Okay. So with 1.0, we had this belief that we were making a secure operating environment for applications. And with 2.0, we recognized, along with our cybersecurity auditing team, big, huge shout out to Radically Open Security for supporting us through both major audits. But we recognized that we needed a way to mediate the access to low-level services. I'll give you an example. If a plugin needs access to the file system, and the app needs access to the file system, and a window needs access to the file system, which one wins? So what ends up happening is, with a careful design of your application, you can determine that in a specific window context, this plugin supersedes the general application access of read-write everywhere to read-only app data, right? It sounds trivial, but write that in code, please. And so through this belief in convention and configuration, what the Tauri developer's brain understands is you have a basic system, you give that basic system basic permissions, and then every plugin that you add into that system has its own basic capabilities that you can restrict or expand based on what it is you want to do. And this is really useful when you're in some kind of environment that's regulated, where you have to show on a programmatic level that this application only has access to the downloads folder or whatever. It's really relevant. And beforehand, when everything was encapsulated in core, like a main part of the application, that was impossible to restrict. Like, just the gymnastics of doing that made it really hard. So I feel that the opportunity cost of restricting plugins' capabilities via active developer engagement is worth it in the long run, because we ship with sensible defaults. That's the whole secure by default, at which you then prove through your design. And that's how you get security by design, right? The fact is, the vast majority of developers never touch these changes, and they never touch these capabilities and change them. And the vast majority are using JavaScript. In the UI, they're calling across the boundary of the WebView to the Rust core, sending a message. They're issuing a command. The command does something and returns a response. And in that way, we are able, on the Rust side of things, to really control and mitigate what's going on. Now, we have the ability for the user to set a very strict CSP in order to prevent the WebView from doing stuff that you don't want it to do, or contacting remote services that it's not allowed to talk to, which is great that it really respects that. CSP is probably the strongest first line of defense that exists. And we never send a function across the boundary. And you know why? You can't. How do you send a Rust function across a JavaScript? It doesn't work. Whereas in other systems that might be isomorphic JavaScript, you can very easily send a command across the boundary. And I think is that how React to Shell really happened?
Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah, you were sending a command that was then just evaluated.
Yes.
Like for the way in which Tauri works is it's not a JavaScript front end. There's no Rust front end. If it's Rust, it's going to be WASM. And that way, it's very much like the actor model, where you're sending a payload, that payload gets interpreted, but used as a way to initiate a command, and that command then returns a response or not, or whatever it needs to do. And in that way, we are able to tell people who listen to our advice and don't do all their business logic in JavaScript, they offload it to the massively parallel, extremely performant Rust side that is also more secure. By following these simple principles, you're able to have a more performant, more secure application than the vast majority of other systems that are out there. And I'm not going to say we are secure. Nothing is secure. We're just more secure, and we help people be more secure when they use apps that are more secure. And I feel that this is really something that developed out of the evolution of the plugin system. Today, we manage about 20 official plugins. If people want to donate plugins, we evaluate that. It comes with a maintenance risk, so we might not always say yes, but we have been known to adopt plugins in the past. I've seen a lot of people in their own projects just have a plugins folder inside of the Rust and a JavaScript folder inside of their util inside their source util that then allows the two systems to talk to each other. And what's great about that model is that I'm going to get hate for this. I work in the supply chain a lot. And version 1.2.7 means something to somebody, means something to NPM. Do you use a caret? Do you use an equals? Do you use 1.1? What does all of that mean ultimately? And because of the way we architected the folder structure of a well-formed Tauri plugin, we have a cargo toml and a package JSON in the root folder of that project. What that means is you can address it with a git hash. You can use a revision hash in order to get the exact code that you need, which, while it's hard for humans to read, on review, you have veracity. You know that hash is exactly the code you're expecting. Whereas caret 1.4.1, you don't know exactly what that means until you go into the package lock. And so for those teams that are in not only regulated, but potentially defense industries, being able to show your boss, I know exactly what line of code this is right here, is a benefit that I feel most are not going to use. But when you need it and you have it, it can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Talking about this a little bit further, I know that some plugins for 2.0 won't be fully stable yet, but how should developers think about plugin stability and versioning for this 2.0 ecosystem?
God, no, versioning is so hard. Let's say there's a dozen packages that make up Tauri in the V2. We've had this discussion before. Do you keep everything in lockstep? Do you just make a blanket 2.4.1 and every time you patch something, you patch everything? We felt that the challenge there was that the meaningfulness of an update loses veracity and you end up being overwhelmed because you're going to see 35 updates. What updated really? So we decided, for good or for bad, we're only going to update things when things get changed. Now, we built our own release system that is used across the official Tauri ecosystem. It was built by one of our board members, Jacob Bolda. And what it does is it has a hook that requires you as a developer, when you are making a change that is a merge request or a pull request against the development branch, that you add a change file. And that change file has a simple structure. It says which project component it is. Is this a patch or a minor? And what changed? And sometimes in one pull request, it's cross-cutting. So you have to change like 5 different pieces. So you list all of them out. And if it's a patch, it's a patch. If it's a minor change. And we try to follow semantic versioning where patches are fixes that don't change any interfaces. They only change the way things work internally. Maybe there was a bug. A minor might introduce changes because we only do a major version every couple of years. We try to keep the API the same, but if something comes up, we might change it. And now, how does this affect the plugin ecosystem? Your mileage is going to vary, right? So there are certain plugins that only make sense on mobile. The QR code plugin, right? Like it's for devices that have a camera, and that camera is going to then be looking at a QR code, and then you can read out the characters underlying that QR code. Doesn't make sense everywhere. And then you might have a GPS plugin, same issue. And so what we find is we fix the plugins that people have requests for, and we always are open to support. If someone has a problem with a plugin, we'll fix it. I feel like the majority of them are stable enough to use. Again, things that interact with the WebView might be different on different platforms. And now we're about to integrate with Ceph. So now it's not just going to be like Mac, Windows, Linux. It's also going to be Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, Android, Ceph. And so I think the key to understanding that is to look at the matrix of the individual plugin where it's useful. And if you have a use for it that we haven't covered yet, file an issue, talk to us in the Discord, and pull requests are always welcome. That's how the working group grows.
Are there any kinds of plugins that you would like to see the community build next? Any requests?
One that I know a lot of people have been working on individually that we decided we're going to just tackle is the Tauri plugin LLM. And what it does is it provides a standardized stylable interface for the UI, as well as a harness for an LLM that you can ship as a sidecar with Tauri. So we're building that at Crab Nebula because we have use for it for one of our upcoming products. And the plan is to make it at the very least source available, but we're probably going to open source it after we've had some time experimenting with it. And if a customer buys it off of us, then we can definitely open source it. Yes, what ones would I love to see? I think another one that I'd like to see would be going beyond light mode, dark mode, treating visual impairment and accessibility. I think that there's a lot of work being done on the user experience side of making things more accessible. There's fonts that are easier to read for people who are dyslexic, that are a little bit jarring if you're not dyslexic, There's, I think, a big opportunity for compliance. So a plugin that allows you as a developer, maybe it's not something you ship, like a developer side plugin that allows you to see where the contrast is too low. I see that happen a lot with these LLM generated websites where the contrast is just too low. You can't read it. And so having something check the paint to see, is this going to fit WICG? Or, I think a Tauri plugin accessibility would be amazing. Another plugin that I've been dying to see would be Ratatouille. So I'd like to see Ratatouille in a Tauri app. It's basically a terminal user interface that my friend is building with a large community, and I'd love to see that Tauri as a first class target for TUIs. I think that would just be neat.
Is there anything that you already have in mind for the roadmap for Beyond 2.0 for Tauri that people could expect?
Yeah. So 1.0 was us proving that it worked. 2.0 was us making it secure, and 3.0 is going to be us making it flexible. I mentioned that we're working right now with a system to make Chromium Embedded Framework available. And in one of our contributors' wisdom, that was always part of the plan, but the plan and the reality don't always meet up. And so with 3.0, we're definitely going to make it simple to swap out a web view, like you were saying, depending on the platform. Saying, oh, on Linux, we want Ceph. On Windows, we definitely don't want Ceph. We want Edge or WebView 2. And on Mac, dealer's choice. Maybe let the user decide. I think that those kinds of things are going to make it into 3.0. And I hope that we finally get testing solved. By that, I mean, it is possible to do end-to-end testing, but it seems like everybody's struggling with it. And I want to make sure that the start that we gave to the WebDriver IO ecosystem continues and improves with the 3.0. I'd also like to see Redux OS support land officially. And I don't know. I think those would be the three big ones on my list. I know that at the rate things are going, it's probably going to be 2027. So what that means is then 2027 in Europe, that's when the Cyber Resilience Act is going to be in full swing. It enters application in December of 27. However, everyone who is shipping software to Europe is going to have compliant software. So I think that we're going to have to make sure that we have a response to the attestation requirements of open source projects, either via the foundation or via a for-profit company. It depends a little bit on how this year shakes out in compliance in Europe, but that's going to be a huge factor. I think any framework that ignores that next year is going to face incredible hurdles, because basically the Commission is expecting everyone who places software on the European market, whether they're European or not, to prove that the software they're making is safe, right? And so if you can't prove that the open source you're using is safe, or rather, let me put it differently. If the open source you're using doesn't make a claim that it is safe, then it's on you to prove that it is. And if you can't, then you might face removal from the market. I'll give you an example of what's going to happen. On the latest, at the 11th of December of 2027, Apple is going to force you to upload your declaration of conformity, your user manual, translated into all the languages where your app is for sale in Europe, and then certify that you have a technical documentation that includes a cybersecurity risk assessment and all of the evidence for it before you can place it on the European market. If you're not in Europe, because they're the importer has these massive requirements. If you are a European company, they're still going to be distributor and they're still going to ask you for the same thing. And this is the same everywhere. So I think that's going to be the big part for Tauri 3.0, is making sure that it's compliant everywhere, because compliance is the new safety.
Absolutely. Well, Daniel, it has been great talking to you. Is there anything about Tauri 2.0 that we haven't talked about yet that you think users should know about?
Maybe just check it out. I know for a fact that Claude Code does a great job of scaffolding you up. However, my advice would be, before you ask Claude Code to do it, just open up a fresh folder in your cursor or your VS Code and run Create Tauri App. Choose the flavor you want to work with. Claude is smart enough to build you a solid app or a Vue app or an Angular app or whatever kind of app you want to build. And honestly, it's probably better than the stuff I made 5 years ago. So have fun. Stop by our Discord if you get stuck. And happy building.
Perfect. That was going to be my next question, is where can people get in touch if they want to contribute or ask questions or just talk to you more about how to do a really good app in Tauri?
If you want to talk to me, probably the best place is my only social network, I guess these days, is LinkedIn. You can find Tauri at our Discord server. You can find the Tauri.app website. And there's everything you need to know and all of the links to the various places where you can find us. Yeah, GitHub.
Excellent. We will be sure to include all of those in the show notes. Thank you again for joining us. It's been great having you on today.
Thanks, Paige. Have a great evening.